just like to say thank you to everyone for coming along this evening. Obviously, this was originally going to be an in-person event, but we switched it to online. So apologies for the last minute change, but we wanted to make sure that we kept the conversation going. We will be reverting back to in-person meetings from next month, and I'll go through those details with you at the end of this. So we're going to be with you for about an hour today. We've got fantastic event lined up. We're going to really get some debates. In fact, there was some talk of violence before, so we hope it won't come to that. But I'll introduce the two speakers in a minute. But first of all, I'd just like to say, thank you for everyone for coming along. I think the community is really, really important, and the idea is for people to hear us speak and to connect with each other, find out around the other things that we're doing, the hackathons, what the PDA task force is up to. But the first thing I want to do is actually do a very quick poll. So I know there's not a huge amount of us on the call today because it's only the second event that we've had since the relaunch. But if everyone can get their phones out or their computers and take part in this poll, because we just want to get a feel what people's opinions are on this debate before we then let Ian and Ant fight it out, as it were. So I'm going to share my screen in a moment. If I can get this poll working, bear with me a minute. Yep, so I'm going to share my screen and hopefully you can see that. So you can use the QR code there, or you can go to www.menti.com and enter the code 89578400. And please do take part, because it really will help us guide the conversation. And I'm sure both the speakers will have a lot to say around the results when they go on to their speech. So I'm going to go to the first question now. You should still see the code at the top. So the first question is a free text box, and it's just, how would you describe your role? So that can be your job title, or it can be what you feel you do. We've had a few people say things like dog's body. So just to get an idea of the audience, so we've got a coach, we've got a teacher, marketeer, benefits realization. So a bit of a mix today, which is great. Project director, ops director, project manager, project consultants. So a nice mix. Interesting that we've got a teacher there. Yeah, if we could put the Menti code in the chat, I'll do that now. So 895, so it is at the top of the screen as well, guys, so you can use that, but there's the code. So that's the first question. Good to have a good mix of people. So, and these are all going to be yes and no answers, so hopefully nice and not too taxing on you this time of the night. So the question is AI a threat or saviour to the project delivery workforce? Because that is the topic of today's debate. So at the moment, 8-1 in favour of saviour, actually 9-2. There's a couple of threats there, guys. So it's definitely not unanimous. And I think that's healthy, because I think the jury is still out, to be honest. And it depends. It really depends how things are regulated. And I know, Ant, you're going to talk about that a bit later. Andy Morrow said, can we have a choice of both? No, sorry. You're going to have to stick your flag to the mast, I'm afraid.
I'll need some more devices to get the threat score up. Run out of devices.
Well, yeah, there's nothing to stop you. What they called? They're called aren't they, farms or something? Voting farms. Well, we got to watch out for in the real elections as well. So next question. Are you worried that AI is going to take your job? I know that's a bit of a loaded question, but let's see what you think. So most people, I think we're going to have the kind of people that come along to this event will probably be the kind of people that are invested in this and think it's an opportunity. So, but there's still a couple of people who are worried. So you've got three there, guys, who are worried that AI is going to take your job. So we'll talk about that a bit more later. Do you think AI will be releasing capacity in your workspace in the next 18 months? I.e., is it going to kind of ease some of the administrative burden that we have to deal with? See, this is something I talked about earlier today, actually. Is it going to be a case of, this relieves some pressure, but we just end up working harder in other areas, because that's kind of what happened with the internet and other things. We thought that was going to sort of release capacity, but all that happens is work ends up piling up in other places. So there's definitely 4 people who have got that point of view. So Ian, Ant, you can refer to that when we do the discussions. Do you think AI will be adding capabilities in your workspace in the next 18 months? Yes or no? And that can be any kind of capabilities. So we're unanimous at the moment, which is brilliant. And after Tuesday's announcements from OpenAI, I think that's starting to become pretty obvious that there's definitely going to be enhanced capabilities. The question is what we do with it and how safe are we? Don't worry, not too much longer. Do you think AI will be adding capabilities in your workspace in the next 5 years? So I would imagine that if everyone said yes to the 18 months, it's all going to be yes to the next 5 years. And he says that quite a few organizations are trialing 4-day weeks. Interestingly, there was a interview with Elon Musk where he was saying governments need to start seriously considering universal income. That would be a nice place to be, wouldn't it, if the government will just pay us to do nothing. But I think his view is that we are going to be at that point relatively soon as AGI approaches, where we probably need to consider what we do with all this spare capacity. And do you think AI will be adding capabilities? Oh, I just did that one. This is the last one. What would help? So sorry about this typo there. What would help you utilize AI in your workspace? So this is a free text box. Would it be training? Would it be, clear direction from the top? Just a few answers to guide the panelists today. Better focused. Money. Well, I think the barrier to entry is coming down, so money should be there. Skills. I think that's the big one. We definitely need to sort of upskill ourselves with this. Strategic support, consensus, training. Yes, absolutely. Expert systems model. Experts. That's an interesting one. Foresight. So that's really what I'll do is I'll put the results of this poll up onto the site along with the recording, so everyone can look into this. There's one, someone said their time to play with AI. Now that's really interesting, because I find the biggest barrier is actually the fact that people want to get this, but they're so busy with a day job, they haven't got time to even start playing with it. The old sharpen the saw analogy. I think that is a real issue. That's a very real a barrier, if you like. Brilliant. Okay. Got 31 responses there, which is absolutely brilliant. So I'm going to stop sharing. And before we go over to introducing the guests, I just want to let people know about the task force. And if anyone wants to get involved in the task force, you can reach out through the pdataskforce.com website or get in touch with me on LinkedIn. We are starting to roll out different ways of interacting. We're going to have a supporters tier. So there'll obviously be the meetup still. There's the hackathon, which is going on the 11th and 12th of June, Sheffield University. You can find all of this on the PDA Task Force website. I'll put the URL in the notes in a minute. And just get involved, guys. This is what we're here for, is to have a place for people who are interested in this stuff to meet up and really feel free to have the conversation. So without any further ado then, what I'm going to do is introduce the 2 guests. They're going to talk about 15 minutes each on either side of this debate, and then we're going to have questions and answers. Now there's a Q&A feature here, so feel free to put your questions in as we go. I'll try and pick them all up at the end. If I don't, we'll try and pick them up and publish them on the website afterwards. But first of all, can I just say what a pleasure it is to have with us Ant and Ian. So let me just do a quick introduction. Dr. Ant Newman, he is the CDO of Projecting Success and is a fellow member of the project of the PDA Task Force, and he's been working in AI for over 20 years, so well before the hype, as it were. And it'd be interesting if you could tell us a little bit when you speak around what's changed in that 20 years. What was AI like 20 years ago? And for the first half of his career, this meant using the company supercomputer. So Yeah, things have moved a long way. And then on the other side of the debate, we have Ian Heptinstall. He's an associate professor of project management at the University of Birmingham. He is a late career academic, so hope for all of us, who before joining academia actually spent 35 years in a range of project, procurement, supply chain and consulting roles. So you felt the pain, haven't you, Ian, of actually delivering projects as well. So absolutely brilliant. So without any further ado, then I'm going to hand over to you, Ant. I think you're going first to do your presentation, and then you can hand swiftly over to Ian before we open up to questions.
Sure thing. Well, I will just share my screen. And I'll start with your question. What's changed in 20 years? So when I started, it was still very much in the 1980s mindset with AI. And sort of, when I say supercomputer, back then it was way more than you would ever imagine a personal computer can be. Nowadays, any of you could spin up something more powerful in the cloud, just like that. So the pace is obviously outstripped it. I think that would probably have been true about 10 years ago. Where it's changed and where it's come back. So when I first started working, and I was working in DSTO and Kinetic. In fact, I'm just going to go to my next slide. So that's like, if my slide will let me change. There we go. So who am I and why should I be speaking to you about AI? So I did like degrees in electronics, so the masters, stuff like that, and then went to Kinetic, which is a military research company mainly. And I was in the military radar systems group, and the kind of research we were doing was utilizing the power of this mass computing, but then putting it on embedded devices, which had been designed, the infrastructure of that was designed sometimes in the 1980s or early 90s. So I used to, for those of you who program, I used to have to worry about whether I was casting a uint 8 or a uint 16. It wasn't, this just, we can process everything. I had to really worry about my memory allocation. And then we didn't have to anymore. Hadoop dropped December 2011, just before I finished my PhD. So I was very, very lucky that suddenly I thought I was going to go from my PhD back to a career in civil service military research or university research, basically where I could use a supercomputer, but no, everyone could do it. That was fantastic. And the era of big data and mass computing, and of course now we're getting more and more answers. We're getting back to these use cases where we want lightweight solutions. So whether it's on your mobile phone, Copilot on your mobile phone, obviously can't run in the same way. So we've got these massive trained models and the transfer learning coming back, and skills I thought I had that I would never need to use again in my career actually are coming back round, which is great for me. I feel very lucky. So my route here was, when everyone started using the power of data science, I suddenly found myself called a data scientist for the first time in my career. And apparently I had over 10 years experience in data science, which was a surprise to me. So I spent 2 years in Formula One, which was a really great experience, but probably like living 1 year on repeat. Very fast paced, but perhaps a little bit just doing the same thing. So a very good grounding for a data scientist in terms of perfecting your models, because you don't really get another industry where you repeat week in, week out and perfect a process at quite the same pace. And then I thought I would found a transceiver business. Turns out I made a very good transceiver, but I wasn't very good at business, and I got very lucky with that exit. And then for the next few years, it was when software CTOs, traditional software CTOs, had tried to get some ROI on their new data teams, their data scientists. They've been bringing data scientists in from academia, and they've been pairing them with software developers over here, and data scientists can't work in agile or whatever it is, and it was a car crash. So I started off working in startups and would go in 3 months or 6 months here and there, and I would restructure the teams, transform them, set them up for success, and move on. And I got bigger and bigger until eventually I was doing that for a multi-billion-dollar retail company. And then more recently, a company where I was running, so the last couple of times I was just going in from scratch. So for example, setting up, when a company's divesting part of their company, they're going to need to start an independent data team. So I was going in, setting that up. And in that, in one of those roles, I was inheriting 140 projects in 90 countries. And I could see the problems in project delivery across the sphere, and it created a niche, which is how I got into project delivery. It's where I am now. I would say when we're talking about how AI might take my job, I separate it into two factors, and I was very interested by that poll because it didn't go the way I was expecting. With regards to releasing capacity, there was a little bit of, for the next 18 months, there was a little bit of, there were some people who thought it wouldn't, which I thought would be reasonable. And when I say releasing capacity, for those who want an example, I'm talking about things like you have something where your government regulated client requires you to put these photo screenshots of this PDF in a certain folder, and you have to do that for these 200 things or these 100 things every month, and that's X number of person hours. Obviously something that sorry, there's a spider which is trying to get into my computer. This little spider. Oh, he's running on my hand now. You can go away and play. So obviously something that's very simple data engineering these days, it probably doesn't even require much or any AI to release that capacity. So there's probably an argument. Ian's probably going to be saying, we can already do this, we don't need AI. In that one, I would agree. But I think AI does add a lot of opportunity for releasing more capacity. Now, where I was surprised was, I think adding capability is the harder side of the coin. I think we need, I'm not even sure it should be our early focus. And I think that's the 5-year goal. But in the 18 months, it was such a big score. I was flabbergasted. I'm wondering if I'm in the wrong here and you're all in the right, because adding significant capability, I think, is a hard ask. There's so many moving parts around that. When you're working along your value chains, when you're working in regulated industries, there's just so many ducks to get in a row. It moves the pace of, in my experience, it often moves the pace of treacle. Now, examples where I would say adding capability were really good would be when I had 140 projects in 90 countries, we had weekly reports, luckily, from the engineering teams and the project teams. And one way of getting an early warning system on when things are about to go wrong outside of the red, amber, green was in the free text sections. We had sentiment questions about how do they feel the project's going. And half the time, people think it's going good, or it's okay, or it's bad, and everyone's in alignment. But when I could see the separation of sentiment from the project team to the engineers, that was a great early warning system. It was really high precision and really low recall. So that's one kind of capability. Without the free text capabilities of AI, we wouldn't be able to do. And this is before ChatGPT 3.5. We were doing this. We had more old school NLP pipelines. So that was what was possible a few years ago. I dread to think of what's possible today. And next, I would say, which jobs might it take? And I don't necessarily think it's where everybody thinks. So obviously this is project delivery. And I think I've got good news on this. I think your jobs, as long as you learn to use the AI, are pretty safe. 5 to 8 years ago, if I was, obviously, so my experience is data, hence this as a data team example. So in a data team, I probably have a couple of architects, and I'm looking across the board. I would, let's say I have data scientists, engineers, and data analysts. And for definition's sake, I'm going to say that data analysts are using models, maybe with a little bit of hyperparameter optimization or something like that, a little bit of tech, but mostly using models which are built by data engineers and scientists. So data engineers are building the engineering pipeline sector, data scientists are building the models together, and they're then being used by the analysts. I think the first jobs to go in the AI revolution are these on the left here, the data analysts, because I think we're just, the models are moving closer to, so in the project delivery space, you won't need the analysts anymore. And then 5 to 8 years ago, if I was building a standard team for a standard project, if I had 2 data scientists, I'd probably have 6 to 8, possibly even 10 data engineers. And the way AI is going already, now today, if I'm setting up the same project, I have 2 data engineers for 2 data scientists, a 1-to-1 ratio. So, I mean, this is slightly separate from project delivery, but in my opinion, a lot of the data engineering jobs, there's still some functions going to be maintained because AI is not replacing jobs, it's replacing tasks, and data engineering is a massively task-orientated role. But I think a lot of those engineers may transition into science-based roles because effectively we're reducing the cost and the burden and the setup costs and all of these problems in getting these models off the ground. And I think in the next 5 years, there will be a growth. It'll be the second coming of data science because they'll be able to do more for less cost. But this, I think, will lead into 5 years plus for project delivery, where those data scientists will then go into decline again in your space in our space now, because we will have a world where suddenly it will be in 5 years plus, the capability will be there with a highly trained project delivery workforce. So I really think that AI is coming, and you have to think about it in how, not even from the AI perspective, in your job, where is there capacity blockages, repetitive tasks, and where, thinking in the blue sky, where would a capability really be useful? And I think really make that list, because it really could be your savior. Because I found that when I've got people who have no experience of AI, everything on your wish list, some things they think are impossible are actually very easy for us to deliver. Some things they think are very easy are actually near impossible, but they would never have surfaced that idea, which is amazing, if we didn't say, don't worry about it. So really don't worry about what AI can do, really think about what you need and what would be amazing. Because I think in many cases, AI will catch up, and in some, it never will. Of course, there are limitations of AI. I've already spoken about tasks versus jobs. And I don't think it's coming for our jobs. I think the nature of our jobs is going to change and evolve. And I think there's a real question about how, when we're releasing this capacity, are we ready to add that capability in the right places? Because otherwise we'll do what James said, and we'll just be like the internet. We'll just make ourselves busy in different ways. And that's my biggest fear. I do see, and on that note, I do see that this is the ultimate upskilling opportunity, because I think right now, the upside to anyone who learns how to really leverage this in the next 18 months, 2 years, will be in such a good position in their careers. I do see there as being, we're a little bit of a Wild West. We have about 18 months until the next EU guidelines on algorithmic transparency are coming out, for example, which will affect many things. Obviously, now we're outside the EU, we'll just be a rule taker. As the UK government does its thing where it promotes its paper 1 week before the EU promotes theirs, but then it just belatedly changes everything to mimic what the EU says anyway. So I think that's just politics. And I do worry about the ethics of certain models, or the way we use them. And there's loads of examples about that. It's not really in the broad remit of whether or not it's going to take our job, except for maybe there's a restriction on how far it's going to advance within our roles. I think there's questions in how we develop trust and who defines as competence. But overall, I'm not sure it's the savior of project delivery. Maybe it's the savior of a taxpayer, so we're more efficient in project delivery. But I think project delivery professionals are going to be just peachy. Back to James.
Good, nice optimistic tone there, Ant. And please, everyone, feel free to add your questions as we go, because we do want to have a bit of a debate once Ian's finished his bit. But without pausing, I'm going to hand straight over to Ian to do the counter argument.
Okay, let me put up. Have I found the right window? Does that look about right, James?
Yeah, that looks good.
Okay. This is the title I chose. If we're looking for a step change in the performance of projects from AI, don't hold your breath. Now, how does that fit into the formal title of this session, which is about threat or savior to project delivery workforce? Now, I was checking through earlier today to say, well, why did I come up with this slightly different perspective on our title? And I did discover where this came from. So when Martin Paver put a post out about 6 weeks ago looking for volunteers to join in this panel discussion tonight, what he was asking for was somebody to put the perspective of why we should be cautious about launching headfirst into data-driven project delivery. So that's not quite the same topic as the headline, but that's the one that attracted me, hence my picking up the question of improvement, step change in performance. And as many of you will know, that aligns to the overarching mission of the Project Data Analytics Task Force, which is about the purpose of all this is to make our project delivery significantly better than it is today and it has been in the past. My overarching concern with this is that the tech can be a distraction, and I won't jump on the bandwagon of saying in today's VUCA challenging complex world, because the world of projects, in my experience, has always been like that. There's not been a nice stable period of projects. The things that bring volatility and uncertainty and complexity have probably changed over time, but I don't think there's been a significant difference. Big projects have always been difficult and subject to uncertainty. So I don't think that's a recent development. But we've always had to manage a limited resource of our attention, the management attention of the organisations we work for and the projects that we run. And that's my headline concern about the exponential growth of data analytics, artificial intelligence, large language model technologies. Because if we want to improve project performance, I don't need any more evidence of what to do. We as a profession need to start doing stuff that we already know. Now, when very early in my project career in the 1990s, when I worked in the chemical industry, we knew from, we were working with the US-based IPA, so not the Government Infrastructure and Projects Authority in the UK, but Independent Project Analysis Inc., which has been measuring, benchmarking and analysing the performance of major capital projects since the 1980s. And the company I worked for was a participant in that benchmarking. So it was quite clear 30 years ago, and all the data since then has simply added more data points that reinforces this. For example, that if you get into project execution before sufficient development, planning, preparation and testing of what you're going to build has been done, the chances of you performing efficiently are very low. There's a very strong correlation between the quality and quantity of preparation, the so-called front-end loading, FEL, before you move into execution. But how many projects rush into execution today? How many newspapers talk about, shovel ready? That's fine. But to be ready for construction, a capital project in my field needed already to have spent 10% of the total capital value in the engineering, the design, the planning, the preparation and the testing work. I know that's nowhere near the number that budget managers like to spend. It's a fraction of that to get to a position at which somebody wants to write a contract to a main contractor, let them get on with it, and they'll play golf on Fridays for a few years until the contractor just sort of delivers this nice parcel of my project. There's a number of things wrong with that approach, that we've got lots of evidence already. So I don't need any more data points. Now, if the interest in AI and data analytics can help as a Trojan horse to get the attention of people who are not listening to the data in the past, then that's great. But for some reason, we're not acting on what's known today. And that's not a new phenomenon in business. Now, Stanford scholars, Bob Sutton and Jeff Pfeiffer wrote a book nearly 25 years ago, The Knowing Doing Gap, which was research into large companies that were not implementing what was known to be good practice. So this isn't a new phenomenon, but it is a big obstacle, I believe, to project performance. Plenty of proven things that are seen as weird niche approaches. That's not how we do stuff around here. But the problem is how we do stuff around here is more the cause of poor performance rather than the solution to it. And that brings on to two, which sort of boils down to, let's not run before we can walk. You know, are we sure that we've identified the systemic core problems of project execution and delivery? I'm not, and I don't think that's a trivial exercise, and therefore we shouldn't be diving headfirst into guessed solutions to the problem if we're not quite sure what the problem is. We know what the symptoms are: poor project performance, unreliable, falling productivity, falling efficiency, unpredictability, but we don't necessarily have any agreement on what the reasons for that are. And I think we should before we dive in. Now, my picture of that clapped out car on the side is my sort of simple analogy on my point. If we were to take that car and I was to put some top of the range Michelins on the wheels, on the rims, and if I was to put a 6-point racing harness into the driver's seat, would it make it a better, faster, safer car to drive? Of course it wouldn't, because the problems with that car are not the tyres or the safety restraint harness for the driver. There's lots of other problems we need to fix first. And that's my issue of diving headlong into data analytics. I think there's a big risk that we use too much of our precious resource, human motivation, and the limited time we've got to get stuff done. So I think there's a prioritization issue. And part of me is jealous about the momentum that the project data analytics community has generated. If only we could take a fraction of that momentum and interest and brain power and focusing it on getting some clarity on what the problem is, developing skills and capabilities in related fields that I feel are an important part of bringing together what we need to do to make a step change to performance. So I'm worried that we'll risk wasting our resource. So that does touch upon the question about our jobs. It might keep jobs going, but are they the right jobs? I'm also concerned that if we're not careful, we might be automating, speeding up, and worst case, embedding and making it difficult to extract ourselves from poor and inefficient working practices. Given what the way we do projects today are producing unsatisfactory results, and the majority of us with any experience believe, even if just intuitively, that life could be so much better. The last thing I want to do is to analyze data from this enormous data bank of projects that have not been very good and build that into our benchmarks. I want the data from the projects that were excellent. And the trouble is they're seen as outliers and ignored. And, oh, that can't be true because 95% of the data points are over here. Maybe those fraction of a percentage of data points are the ones that we should be learning about. We should want to know, what do we need to do to hit the P5 target, as opposed to arguing over whether we should set our targets to be P80 or P90 or P75.6. No. How do we get a P5 target? And that brings it back to, if we're starting to put significant technology into sort of calculating optimum solutions, maybe we're optimizing the wrong problem. But worse than that, is optimization the right thing that we should be trying to do? Many challenges in the world are the sorts of problems that there is an optimum solution that is calculable. The thing with projects is they are social construct. They involve people. they're not deterministic systems. They're not hard systems. They're soft systems. They're full of emergence and unknowability. And the aim, I suggest, should be satisficing solutions, not optimum solutions, because optimums are impossible to get. Firstly, the mathematics is very hard. Secondly, we can't get all data on all the important variables. You've got the issue of complexity of, a small change in starting conditions has a massive change in the outputs. But also the underpinning formulae and algorithms, they also change over time. The relative weighting and importance of different variables. Systems researcher Professor Scott Page calls dancing landscapes. The whole environment moves like the surface of an ocean. Sure, you can work out averages, but the average movements of the waves are useless to you when you're in a boat on a particular day in a particular spot. You don't care about average wave height. You care about the individual point. It's not very helpful for a meteorologist to tell you, oh, the likelihood of the weather conditions you're suffering are 0.3%, once in every 10,000 years. That's no good if you're there in front of them and have to cope with them. So satisficing solutions that rely on heuristics and rules of thumb rather than brute force calculation. There's an important role for those in learning and improving the way that we deliver projects. And some of that doesn't require technology. I had a comment on a LinkedIn post when I publicised this event early on from Wolfram Müller, somebody I know out in Germany. And he was recalling the days he worked for one of the internet companies, 1&1 at the time, Ionis now. And he said, as an experiment a few years ago, they threw brute force computing at trying to solve some of the technical problems that they had. And that brute force computing came up with nowhere near as good, or actually in some cases quite close to the heuristic rules of thumb that they were using and could calculate on a spreadsheet. They were near enough is good enough, particularly when you're looking for fast feedback. So that's the sort of hub of my concerns. And at the bottom, those of you who are into the field of AI will probably have heard of Judea Pearl, Turing Award winner, Frontiers of Knowledge Award winner recently, proposed for that by Google's chief technology officer, I believe. So somebody who knows a heck of a lot more about this AI topic than I do. Now, he summarizes his understanding of the use and exploitation of AI linking to human knowledge in 3 rungs of a ladder. What we seem to be talking about at the moment is his first rung: correlation, patterns, extrapolating from the past and assuming the future will be the same. Now, there are some systems where that's quite appropriate. Deterministic repeat systems, working out the attraction due to gravity. Great, do a few experiments, get a few bits of data, and you can extrapolate. Human-based systems like projects, I'm not sure that's appropriate, particularly complex adaptive system environments. Extrapolation and linearity is not inherent in the system itself. And to start to think about some of those systems and artificial intelligence, Pearl talks about stepping up to the next rungs of his ladder of causation. The second rung is about understanding the relationships between variables. If I do X, I will get Y, which involves some degree of experimentation, not extrapolating from the past, but starting to understand causation, which brings on to the third rung of the ladder that he calls sort of counterfactual, the ability to imagine a situation that hasn't existed for reality. Now, the counterfactual we all know from commuting is the question of what would have happened if I'd have taken route B tonight rather than route A. And there isn't a parallel universe, so we will never know. Now, in manufacturing organizations where you've got extremely high volumes, you can do a quick test, you can hold everything constant, you can turn a knob, you can see what the effect is, you can turn it back again. We can't do that on major projects. They take too long. We don't know all the variables. We don't know the causation. I think that's where we should be focusing a lot of our effort, understanding the underpinning causal models. Then the data that we can be gathering can be usefully used to help us improve and correct and build on that model. But then we can run value-adding scenarios where we can say, what happens if we manage a project in this way compared to that way? And what computers can do is to do things damn fast. We can't do that experiment on real projects because it takes 3 years and everything else changes in an unpredictable way. But we can test those things out with causal models on computer systems. So I think there's some gaps there that I'm not sure that we're addressing. So that's more of my concern. Yeah, artificial intelligence, project data analytics, they're part of the picture. But like this person doing the jigsaw, yeah, until we've got the other pieces, we've no idea what that picture is going to be. So yeah, back to the question, yes, I think AI is a threat to the project delivery workforce. If we don't expand our view of sort of technology and what's driving project performance, then the threat will be to the people whose jobs get automated and speeded up. But if we do that, I think there's a longer term threat that will embed in the wrong and efficient ways of working. And we as the project profession have missed an opportunity to make projects better. I think projects will get better, but generalists with the intuition to know how to run projects will be the ones in senior positions calling the shots. And that would sadden me, that it's not the project profession that's encouraging the general manager of the business to experiment and to try different things and to improve. It will be the other way around. And I think that's a threat to our broader profession, as well as just the individuals involved in individual technical roles. That's the hub of my claim. So it will be a threat, but maybe not the threat we perceive.
Fantastic. Thank you, Ian. That was extremely interesting. And thank you, Ant, as well. And, you know, I think it's a really interesting point there. You know, it's whatever side of the equation you come down on, we can, I think, all agree that we are at a very kind of sensitive point with all of this, where the decisions that we make now and the things that we do now are going to have far-reaching impacts. But you're right, it would be an awful situation if all we do is basically automate what we do now, embedding the current practices and just letting software companies do it for us instead. So that would be the worst of both worlds. But we've got some really great questions here. If I'd like to start with a question from Christoph, and he's picking up on your point, I believe, Ian, on automating and embedding these kind of poor and inefficient practices. He says, on one end, he can see that too many organisations in their project delivery keep doing what they've always done. Poor practices that lead to projects going over budget, over cost, not achieving the initial success criteria. But on the other hand, he worries that rubbish into AI leads to rubbish out. So a lot of work is required to enable that the input to the AI needs to be considered and accurate. And that obviously takes time. So I think he's just putting the two thoughts there. Any comments on that from either of you?
I'll start, and then I'm sure Ant will have a view. Doing what you've always done and expecting a different result is where I would start. I think on the one hand, I don't see enough experimentation, and on the second hand, experiments done are very local and isolated, and only the people involved learn from them. There's not the process of double loop learning, where learning from an experiment gets embedded into the underlying process. and I think there's a number of reasons for that, certainly in the construction field. That don't know how to address it, but I think on his second point, if we ever expect to have all the data and clean data, I think we're in a never-ending search for nirvana. It doesn't exist. It won't exist. And reading and listening to Judea Pearl, his whole point is, once we get into causation and causal models, it actually includes probabilistic causation, which is because we can never have all the right data that's there anyway. So we learn from the best that we've got, and we use the idea of Bayesian reasoning to allow our experience to improve that model continuously, rather than to try and optimize it in the first place. So yeah, we've got the data we've got. Let's do the best with it, rather than waste a couple of decades trying to get it all clean and nice and neat, only to discover that we're missing the key variables anyway.
Yeah, I'm a big one for that, trying to wait for this like nirvana situation. And like you say, you mentioned that actually we treat the outliers as outliers, when actually they're the ones that we should be aspiring to, because they're probably the few that do deliver really well. Ant, any comments on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, you're entirely right. I mean, so the classic thing is bad data in, bad result, but actually there's a bigger problem here, which is the understanding gap on the AI and the modeling and just the mathematical modeling side in general. For example, good data in but plus the wrong model is actually worse than just as Ian says, the heuristic of we kind of know it works. That is true. So I think when we are building these models, we really need the right cross-disciplinary team. So I don't have the depth of project delivery experience that, say, my CEO does, or most of the people in this room have. But we have to make sure we get that correct marriage. So, for example, very simply, as my grandmother, who left school at about 9 or 10, would say, and she would say, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. I think in professional terms, we call it the Dunning-Kruger effect, where a little knowledge and you're going up to the peak of Mount Stupid, and then you get a bit more knowledge and you think, oh, you realize how much you don't know. So let's take weather, for example. I think Ian mentioned weather. When we're looking at, if there's a 35-40% chance of rain, and that's the most likely thing on a standard model, many people are going to go, oh, it's the model says it's going to rain today. But actually, there could be 5% of this, 7% of that, and they all add up to non-rain scenario weathers. We don't know whether it's going to be cloudy or sunny, but we know it's a 65% chance of not raining. And in project delivery, when I see statistical models being used already, and this very much supports Ian's point, they're being used in the wrong ways. And it's so widespread that at first when I look around, I'm like, oh, I just want to tell people, stop, know what you're doing. But there's so much everywhere that I go from wanting to stop people to wanting to just hug people to just wanting someone to hug me, because it's like, oh my God, there's too much going on. And it's as simple as I've seen people using algorithms and extrapolating from data, which is bimodal data set, and they're treating it like it's monomodal. So,
yeah.
It's got an average from this bimodal data set and it's meaningless. That's the worst example that I've seen. I'm sure no one in this room would be doing that. So I think the key is getting these cross-disciplinary teams with genuine expertise. And that gap is, and the challenge in project delivery is, how do you get genuine AI engineers with genuine depth of knowledge? How do you get enough into the sphere to really move it forwards? Because there's a difference between learning how to use AI products that are there in your workspace and really building out the capabilities across the industry. I see them as very separate. I think everyone can learn how to use AI to advance in their careers and increase capability and do a lot. But I think there's a separation from what Ian's worried about, which is this almost generational baked in bad practice and how to identify the correct data and how to score it, how to weight it, how to assemble your training data. There are people who study PhDs on this, so it's non-trivial. But we should be vastly outperforming the heuristics in anything but the common channels. In all of the edge cases, we should be massively outperforming. That's my opinion.
I think in some areas, yes, but maybe maybe not in other areas. So we need to prioritize. On that point of getting the right people together, I think getting the people with the analytical knowledge is probably the easier part of the problem, because I find that
getting them involved or getting them in the right place, like the right influencing place.
Well, I think there's probably more of them available. Where the issue might be is people with project experience that is very rare. So if you get people with project experience, what they know is what they do. Now, quite a lot in when I used to do a real job, on a couple of occasions, I was involved in sort of overseeing our ERP systems and its capability. And I came to this conclusion that big ERP systems, whether it's SAP or in UK construction, it's Coins, Oracle, have just grown like Topsy in an uncontrolled way, because people have said, can you get it to do this? And there's not been enough thinking, well, is that a sensible thing to do? That's what you do today. Now, the software companies, the customer's always right, even when they're wrong. So it gets done, it gets coded. And then the next generation says, well, this must be a good thing to do because it's built into the software. Now, that's my concern with groups that get together today, because 99% plus of the project delivery community have not seen and experienced what excellence looks like. Now, I was lucky because I'm old, but to people today, what I'm talking about is an imaginary world, because nobody runs projects like that anymore. So I'm saying, well, but we need that sort of either imagining, or you're old enough to have seen it, to say, we don't have to do projects that way. It can be done this. Maybe we should model both those scenarios, not just the status quo. And that's my concern, even of problem solving, is people who can imagine life that might be different. Have we got enough cognitive diversity and experiential diversity in the teams thinking about these things?
Can I highlight a really interesting divergence really quickly?
Just very quickly before we move on to another couple of questions.
So
last point on this.
I was worried about the shortage of data. Ian was worried about the shortage of project people. It's complete, but I'm wondering if, because that's my field, sometimes in my field, I see people claiming to be data people, but they're sort of surface and it's a bit charlataning. And maybe because that's my experience. So maybe, Ian, we both have our own biases and how we're looking at it. And maybe we need to think and collaborate more just to fix that. It's very interesting, but we diverged into opposites there. Sorry, James, please, next question.
No, I'm sure we could stick on that point for all night, but I'm very conscious of the time. We've got a few minutes. There was a couple of practical questions that have gone through that I just wanted to address. So Amanda Cox actually asks, beyond yourselves, are you aware of any other key contacts specific to healthcare and the NHS? She's aware, I'm aware of some desire to explore this area and invest in it, but I believe a lot of change managers are wary of looking foolish and don't know where to start in terms of discovery exercise, key contacts, funding. This may well be a silly question, but I have to start somewhere. So I just wanted to address that, and both you guys can comment, but obviously that's kind of what the task force is for as well. You can go onto the website, which I've put in the chat, and there's a lot of information there. But I don't know, Ant, do you want to say anything about what Projecting Success does as well?
Well, we actually have apprentices on our AI for project delivery apprenticeships from the NHS. So I'm sure we can find the right contacts for Amanda to follow up afterwards. Yeah, I don't work in that side of the business, obviously, so I don't know them offhand, but I'm sure we can hook Amanda up.
Cool. Well, just get in touch, Amanda. You know, that's exactly what we're here for, to sort of demystify these things. And then one more question before we kind of have a roundup and a kind of final statement from each of you. Ed Reed asks, as a project professional, what practical steps should I and my team do tomorrow in preparation for taking advantage of AI in delivering success in my project the day after? So if there was one tip, and that doesn't have to be, it could be more on Ian's side, i.e. get your projects right. But yeah, what's your one tip each? Ant, do you want to go first?
Sure. Decompose. Before you even think about the AI side, just break down what you're actually doing, your tasks that you're doing. because then you know where to go. Because the biggest problem I see, not problem, the biggest waste of time I see is people are going to use the Chat GPT or Gemini or whatever, and they don't really know how or what they're going to do with it, and they're not really getting much value out of it. I think before you even worry about that, if you really break down your exactly what tasks you're performing, that can allow that you can see, is there capacity to be released, is there capability to be added, get that map, or as our CEO likes to call it, a jigsaw lid. And we actually have some open source information to help you to break those down as well if you need it as well. So just get in touch, we can help with that. It's all open source, it's all public, it's not like a consultancy thing or anything, it's just to help the community. Don't think AI first, think break down your problem.
And Ian, would you agree with that, or any other follow-ons?
I think experiment with technology on your project, definitely. I always did when I ran projects, but I saw that separate from knowing how to run the project. So I would certainly encourage you to experiment, which may include third parties, suppliers of technology, suppliers of service, who are using this rapidly growing technological capability to provide services that you can then turn into value on your project. I think that's a more short-term opportunity, is to jump out of the habit of saying, well, for the past 5 years, we've done things this way, we've used this tech. Get some freedom to experiment with a range of different things. And that might be somebody within your team doing something bespoke for you because they happen to have some of these technologies, or they've been on one of Projecting Success's apprenticeships. But manage that as a portfolio of investments. Don't put all your eggs in that high risk basket. So do a few, have a few plays, learn quickly from them, safe to fail testing and probing, but don't expect the technology to fix the fundamental problems of your project. If you want your project to run better, start researching some of the proven outlier methods of techniques of bringing project teams together, contracting for projects, scheduling and controlling, in ways that Oracle don't build into Primavera, alternatives to earn value that actually give you much better forewarning and early warning and insight, etc., etc. So if you've got the ability to change how you do things, that would be my response to that.
Yeah, very good advice. And I would just add to that. I think the other thing you can do is and Ryan just come up with a point which is very apt, which is, you don't have to dive straight in your projects. I find that you can experiment with some of these AI tools in a safe place, i.e. in your own personal projects, so you can work out what they're doing without having to jump straight into your project. That's a way of doing it without, going both feet first. So for instance, you could use ChatGPT to help you with a home project that you might be working on, or something like that. And then that's in a very safe place. And then you can get the findings from that to kind of say, oh, okay, that's what works. And then you can kind of apply that to the project world. So I know we've got a few more questions. We are running out of time, so I do want to have a conclusion. So if each of you could do a very brief kind of final statement, and then I'll just wrap up by letting people know about the next event. So Ian, do you want to do a quick kind of wrap up?
Yes, my headline wrap up is a short phrase that I've pinched from some friends that I know in a different field, and they talk about getting our thoughtware straight before we look for the software. Thoughtware before software. They've had some great success in the past 10 years in the general field of manufacturing and control. Now, large-scale manufacturing invested significantly in computer-based technologies in the 60s with MRP, MRP2, ERP, and has grown businesses like SAP and Oracle to massive organizations. Although almost every single business in the world invested in that technology, its main benefit was helping the accountants add numbers up faster. There's no evidence I'm aware of that there's been any sustained improvement to manufacturing efficiencies, return on investment, productivity due to those technologies. Except in the past 10 years, when the thoughtwares got straight, the underlying algorithms that embrace the inherently complex world that we operate in have been built in. So get those right, and then software will help speed up that, roll it out, accelerate the speed of change, and get you to pull ahead of your competition. So that's my headline. Thoughtware first before software.
That's a nice snippet there. And Ant, your wrap up, please.
I think that it's not a threat to the project delivery workforce at all. I think it's a threat to many of the tasks involved in 2024's project delivery. That's the full sense of project delivery. I think that is a real opportunity. The train's starting to leave the station, but it's a massive train, so it's going to speed up very slowly, and there's still plenty of time, no stress to get on the train. As my grandmother said, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing. So I think take the time, don't rush, just read around it, not just ChatGPT and chatbots. Although I would finish with one thing. I think the most impactful technology in project delivery, especially with government clients or any clients where your data can't leave the local sphere, will be the best advance in the last 12 months, which is the local LLM and how that's progressing by far.
Those small language models that are coming out. Yeah,
for sure. I think that's where, it's my job to keep up with it, and I was keeping up with pretty much everything in the world up until about the middle of February, and then it suddenly exploded to the point where I was lost. It was too much. But I'm working on a local language model for project delivery as well. So and so it's literally my job to keep up with it, and I can't keep up with it. So I think that's a good last message. Don't feel overwhelmed, or don't worry about feeling overwhelmed. We all feel overwhelmed. It's literally my job to keep up with something specific, and I'm overwhelmed by that niche. So there's just too much.
Well, on that point, and as we wrap up, we do actually have a newsletter that I produce, and I've put it in the chat, that tries to wrap up and make sense of everything that happens. And it's a quick 5-minute digest that is delivered to your inbox. So subscribe to that, and it won't necessarily keep up with everything, but you'll get a good idea of what's happened in that week, and you don't have to worry about reading every single news article that comes up. Before we wrap up, just another couple of announcements. The next event is back in person. So this was a bit of an anomaly. All the rest of the monthly events will now be in person. It will be back at Glee's offices, and we're going to look at client impact on data-driven projects. Now, I am aware that this is right bang in the middle of the Euros for any football fans, and that evening we have Scotland versus Switzerland. Being half Swiss myself, I've got a vested interest in that, so I am going to arrange for somewhere to decamp afterwards for anyone who is interested in having a beer or a drink and watching the football. But that's the next big event. The other thing, just to show you, is if you're not aware of the Project Data Analytics Task Force website, it's pdataskforce.com. It's got all our events in there. We've also got the Project Hack 20 that's coming up, and so you can sign up to it directly on the website, 11th and 12th of June at Sheffield University. We've also got our podcast here where we talk to various industry experts, delivered again straight to your favourite podcast platform. So do kind of bookmark that page, because we try and keep this updated as much as possible, and we are going to put the recording and the poll results from tonight's event in here within the next day or so. So on that note, I would just like to say thank you to everyone, and really do look forward to seeing you in person at the next one. Ian and Ant, thank you so much for your time. It was a really great discussion, lots and lots to unpack there, and you've got my mind buzzing when I should be trying to wind down at this time of the evening, but there we go. So take care everyone, have a lovely evening, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you.